welcome to Art for Life. I'm your host, Pete Brown. Today we're going to be jumping into some different territory. We're going to work on portraiture today. In a moment I'll introduce our model, Hannah. But before we start painting, I wanted to give you some basic proportions of the human face that we'll want to pay attention to as we go. The couple of things here I've charted out. I did a sketch of a woman's face. The most important part of trying to get a portrait right is positioning the features of the human head. The most important one is that the eyes are directly in the center of the head. So the distance from the top of the head to the pupils is equidistant to the pupils to the chin. That's a given always. So halfway between the top of the head and bottom of the chin are the eyes. The human eye, the head is also approximately 5 eyes wide. Remember that. The average distance between the pupils on a human face is 2.5 inches. So you've got, but this distance of the eye here should equal that distance right there, and again the eye. So the distance between the eyes is 1 eye wide. The nose is typically one half. The base of the nose is halfway between the pupils and the base of the nose to the pupils. So that's half of the distance of the lower part of the face. Then from there, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. The depression of the chin to the center of the mouth to the base of the nose. 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Over here, the face, some other general proportion. Top of the eyebrows typically to top of the head, 1/3. From there to the base of the nose, typically 1/3 and 1/3 for the lower. These portions may change a little bit. Everyone's nose is slightly different, but this basic layout of the human face is important. Now let's talk about colors that we're going to use in our palette for making flesh tones. I've got some background colors over here. I may start on this one with a simple burnt umber and white to map out a face like this with shadows. We'll do our light map, lights and darks. When we view the human face, we want to view it as kind of as facets on a diamond. Each place, if I look at my cheekbone here, the side of the face, imagine them squared off like diamond facets. The forehead going this way, this way, this way. We basically have an upside down egg that we shave off facets. Now let's talk about the colors we're going to use to try to match skin tones. First, we'll start with the Old Masters palette, which was any flesh tones we want to derive from 3 basic colors: a red, a yellow, and a touch of blue to cool it down. Well, in the Old Masters palette, it was burnt sienna, our red, raw sienna was a yellow, and Payne's gray was the blue they used, a touch of that. Payne's gray is basically 2 parts black, 1 part ultramarine blue. So you can substitute a little bit of ultramarine blue instead of that. That is this mixture over here. We mix the two to make a yellowish pumpkin color. Then we begin to step it down with white, and we get approximate flesh colors. So this has a little bit of blue in it. I'll touch more in there to show you what I'm doing. And then we take more white, step it down, and we make value flesh. As we begin to get into the shadow side of the face, we'll add a little bit of violet to that mixture. Now, the other mixture we'll use over here, this is a more modern one. Again, any red, yellow, and blue can work. In this particular one, I've got alizarin crimson for a red. I've got raw sienna again for my yellow. And I've got the tiniest bit of phthalo blue for the blue. If I take the alizarin crimson out here, and whoops, a little more of my raw sienna over here. So I got alizarin crimson, raw sienna. Make that look almost a pumpkinish yellow, if you will. I'm going to add the tiniest bit of this phthalo blue so it doesn't turn green, not too much of it. Get that mixture, something like that, ugly pumpkinish color. Take a little white, and I can begin to step that down, and I can make flesh tones out of that. So a red and a yellow with a tiny bit of blue to cool it gives us a basic flesh tone. Okay, in just a moment, again, my backgrounds, since I want a neutral background on a face, I'm going to use today a little bit of tube black, which I rarely use for anything, tempered with some gray and purple or violet to make a background color. We don't want to distract from our model. And to map out the colors, I'm simply going to do it as this charcoal drawing is just dark and light. I'm going to use some burnt umber and white to lay in the face. So we'll be back in a moment. We're going to set up our model, and I'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back to today's lesson on portraiture. I'm very happy to introduce our model, Hannah Limbaugh. Hannah, you can look at the camera and say hello. Hi. We're going to have her staring off to the side here, and her part today is much more difficult than mine, trying to be still for a 30-minute show. Now, we're going to get this, trying to get the basics for you. We may not finish the portrait today, so it may be that we finish it next week on next week's show. But to get started, I'm going to try to lay out somewhat of a light map here. So I'm going to take a little of the mixture I mentioned earlier, basically some raw umber and a little white into that, and get Hannah's proportions laid out. Now again, the top of her head to the bottom of her chin is our guideline. I'm using something called sight size. If I hold this from where I'm standing and hold this up, get the top of her head to the bottom of her chin and swing it toward my canvas, that'll give me my markers on where I need to put the paint, the size of her head. So here's her head is going to be roughly this size on the canvas. Now I've got to get some approximation. While just before starting this portrait, I did some background work here. This will be my eraser color as well. So halfway now between this, while I'm talking and trying to paint at the same time, roughly halfway here, are going to be Hannah's eyes. Now I've got her face turned slightly. I'm going to find the center of her head this way, down through her nose, mouth, and into her chin. So I've got to kind of get where her features are laid in. I'm just trying to first make some line marks. This is going to be my light map. I'll try to explain where all the features are as we go along. So I've got to get her turned a little more here. Righty. I've got her eyes centered, her nose here, her mouth here. And you may see this slightly different angle than where I'm seeing it, but hopefully we'll come out with everything. You'll see her portrait, and hopefully we get a good likeness of Hannah before this day is out. There, down here, some more white into that for an eraser color. Again, I'm trying to do a light map right now of where her facial features are, her nose here. And if I come up here with some more of this mixture, this is not my flesh tones I'm using at this point. This is simply some light and dark to find out where we're going with each feature. Her eyebrows will be up in here. Hannah is fair complected with blonde hair. Kind of makes this even more difficult. Today I'm working with acrylic paint. Normally when I work with portraits or human, I do oil paint. But for the TV show, we need to get it done, and acrylics will dry quicker and give us what we're looking for much faster. So right now, trying to map out all of her features. Her mouth here. We'll talk again about where everything goes. And with portraiture, there is a lot of correction. You put it down, you look at it, you remeasure. It's right or it's wrong. More often than not, it's wrong for the first few attempts. So you have to keep going back and forth to make corrections. So now our light side is on the right of her face. So I need to get let's try to get those markers in, maybe a little more white into this mixture, just to put her cheekbones where they belong. The side of her cheek coming down here is catching some light. Up on her forehead, a little more light up here, over the eyebrow, a little lighter. When I put the flesh tones in, I'll make these more prominent, these light and dark areas. For her ear, I'm going to go back a little darker. When you're painting someone and you get to the ear, please don't put a lot of detail in it. Nobody cares what the ear looks like. It's just there. And most of the time it's covered with hair, except in my case, no problem. When I look at again, the eyes should be in the center here. I'm going to see if I'll get a ruler, but let me just do it this way first. This way, that looks about half. I think I'm on track, kind of, sort of. I'm going to just indicate the pupils a little bit here so I know where I'm going. I'm just using the corner of the brush at this point. There's no detail this early in the game. If you try to detail it now, it just won't work. So let's get some behind her nose here. That plane, her nose here. Coming in this way is coming to the forehead. This is all shadowed over here. Maybe not quite that dark, but again, we'll have to adjust this with some flesh tones. Just trying, this is the same, what I'm doing now, as if I were to draw her in charcoal first. Works out to be about the same process. So that, a little of this, more of that white. And you'll notice I'm not using a small brush. I'm using a fairly large brush here because I need to get it covered. And at this point, we cannot have detail, because if we start trying to draw the detail now, we'll never get anywhere. You have to lay in, mass in, same as if you're doing a landscape. You got to lay in your shapes. With this on the human face, we're doing the same thing. We're putting markers. We're putting planes, as I mentioned a moment ago, as though this were facets on a diamond. We have to get those features laid in. Now that's too pure a white for this part, but it will tell me where I need to go with this. Let's go ahead and give her a neck here. We have to have a neck. The top of the ear typically is at the level with the eyebrows. The bottom of the ear is typically at the base of the nose. The markers we talked about earlier keep coming into play. On the top of her lip over here, there'll be some lighter area right here. Be some dark area up under her chin here. I will probably have to change to a different brush in a moment. But again, let me try to get this basic pattern laid down. What I may do is when we give Hannah a break, I may make my corrections and come back from there. But let's try to get a little further here. Get her neck laid in. Her shoulder comes up in here. Base of the nose typically also aligns with the occipital bone in the back of the head. So as the back of her head here, that should line up with the back of her, the very back of her skull would be back here. We won't see that because of her hair, but behind, that's where the earlobe comes in. Occipital bone, we'll put some hair out here later. Let's get some shadow side of her neck. The way I'm seeing her, her neck is coming out from below her chin here. This is, again, can be very tedious to watch someone else do it, but I hope you'll bear with me. For the purpose of this, obviously, is to teach you how to approach such a thing. So we're going to put a shoulder here, get her shoulder kind of laid in here. We may end up doing this as a vignette, just letting it fade into the background. Again, I'm using acrylic. This dries very quickly. When I'm working in oils, I have more time to move the paint around. All right, here we go. We're laying that in. Let's get some light over here now. Well, not that much. Back and forth, back and forth. That's painting. What we're going to do today, too, is try to make this kind of a more modern approach than a lot of layers. We're not going to blend this overly. Right here, where the turning shadow, that right along Hannah's neck, you can see that there's the dark meets the light. If I put a little light, a little dark together, kind of in a crosshatch, but then pull it down, that's a light blending. That's about as much of that as I want to do. Don't blend as you go. If you're even trying to do, a lot of people paint portraits in layers, which is a great way to do it as well. But don't blend the whole thing as you're going. Again, light and dark here with that turning edge. I'm going to do a little crosshatch pattern, but just a light pull. Whoops, too much darkness on the brush there. Do a light pull over that with a drier brush and knock that turning edge. Again, a little cross hatch, knock it out to get the turning edge. We'll put some color down here for her blouse. We can make it any color we want. It doesn't have to be the pretty orange that it is. It can be something else. Right here, where her neckline comes in, we may have a little reflected light here. There are 5 tones in this human face, much as the very first lesson I did for the TV series. On her face, we have 2 shadow tones. We have her body tone of her shadow, and we also have some reflected light shown right here under her chin. Up under her chin, there's reflected light. On the other side, we have the main body tone, we have the light side and highlights. So those are the tones we're working with and trying to achieve here with right now with simply black and white, as though we were doing a charcoal painting, a charcoal drawing. We'll have to change that in a moment with skin colors just to try to get a matte. Doesn't quite look like Hannah yet, does it? But it will. We hope. Else she'll say, I quit, out of here, no soup for you. Okay. You holding up okay, Hannah?
Yes, sir.
Good, all right. We're coming along here. Just trying to get your basic shapes laid in. I'll be losing, why did I do that? We need to lose her. When you're doing any kind of a painting, and this in a portrait, what is important, we have gone to great lengths. Our producer, Norm Allen, has changed the lighting so that we can see the shadows on Hannah. It's important when you're doing a portrait to have a light side and a shadow side. If you have full light on something, it's very hard to make it have roundness. The most difficult portrait to do would be facing straight on because you can't see the shadows as well. So we're going to lose her on the left side of this portrait into the shadows and enhance the right side. Okay, I'm almost there for this. Let me see. A couple more. I'm not sure how we're doing on time. Norm will let me know here in a moment. Let's get some more. It's kind of laying her hair shape. Obviously, we don't paint individual strands of hair. When we're doing this blonde hair, the umber that I've chosen to lay in the shapes will also serve as well as an underpainting for her blonde hair. So hair that is blonde will have the yellowish tones, of course. We'll pull the hair out of here, bring it down here. All right, there. And we're going to be losing it over here, so but we are going to bring it around. That will change. Getting there. A little bit more of the background over here to cut it in. Our background color also serves as our eraser. So what I have to do now is erase everything that isn't Hannah and just pull it out. So then, and if I'm going to do that, I have to push into the background, pull some of the peanut butter into the chocolate, chocolate into the peanut butter. So that's how the process is going here. All righty, now let me see. I've got to get her facial features laid out a little bit better. Let me get the center of her mouth. That's an important line. May even take some of this dark to do that. So where her mouth, the center of her mouth, roughly, this is where I mark that. Okay, the corner of the mouth goes over basically and aligns with the inside of the pupil. The inside line of the pupil, which is up here. Let me mark that for you. A little better. So if I darken that, okay, I want her center of her mouth there. Then it's going to turn over this way. Hannah's not got a big smile, obviously, because if you had to sit and stare at a wall for 30 minutes, you wouldn't be smiling either, would you? All right. So I'm going to try to put the shape of her lips in there. And again, all I'm doing is using the corner of the brush. No sense in trying to do detail here, but just to suggest where these features hit. I hope they're showing up well for you on camera. We'll find out in a moment. A couple of things I'll point out here once we get to the flesh tones that'll help us see what we're doing here too. There, more highlight up here, light up here, lighter yet. So this, a little more here, where this is coming down. Her eyelids aren't that big. Her eyebrows, rather, excuse me. Shape of her eyebrows. This is her. What you'll see throughout this process is a lot of correction. You lay it down, make the correction, put it in again. You'll notice I haven't gone nuts with the nostrils yet. There's no point in making them too dark too soon. But I'll push it up here just a little bit so you can see where they are. And on this side, it's really in shadow. There's two things we don't want to overemphasize in a portrait is the nose and the ears. We want the end of the nose to kind of disappear. If you make it real prominent, it will just not look good. So, but right now I've got the light because that plane, I put light there because that's where I'm going to put a lighter skin tone. This is my light map I'm trying to do here. Out there now, on the other side of her face, over here on the shadow side, there's a little bit of light that's hitting here. It won't be that as light as I just put it down. Nothing on the shadow side can be as light as something on the light side, and nothing on the light side can be as dark as something on the shadow side. Very important if you want to have it balanced. All right, so there's that. I now do have to put her eye sockets in there a little better. That's too far over for the pupils, so let's erase that. Now the pupil's got to come over a little more. The only two things in a human face that are exactly the same are the distance of the pupils. If you get the pupils correct, everything will look good. Everything else opposes each other, but the pupils move in sync. They stay in sync, and it's important to get those accurate. Okay, oh, too light. Nothing can be that dark on this side. You just said that and did it wrong. So let's try to lighten that. Okay, let me a couple little more marks here, and then we'll probably change to our flesh colors mixtures. I see a couple now corrections real quick here, coming inside a little bit here with the background color. Again, this is my eraser. This eye socket, as we go to shape the eyes, we have to remember too that the eye socket is a round shape. We'll some of this right into the hair, into there. Some of this darker color. Some of this is this and this. I'm just grabbing background color that I've kind of pre-mixed, which my background color again was black, tube black, which I rarely use for anything except background, with a little bit of violet and gray and white. So there's that. Whoops. That doesn't look correct. Let's do this one. Knowing that that's going to be hair. Alrighty, let's take a momentary pause. We'll give Hannah a break, and I'm going to change to the flesh colors, and we'll try to get this laid out a little more. Welcome back to Art for Life. Today we're working again with Hannah. She's back in position, had a little break. While she was taking a little break, I also did a couple of corrections to get the features in the right place. I'm switching now from just the dark mixture for the light map to start to work the flesh tones in. So we're going to work the left side of her face, the shadow side, with the same mixture I talked about earlier, but I'll add a little violet in it on that side. The light side, the value flesh. Again, I used alizarin crimson, raw sienna with a tiny touch of phthalo blue, step that down with white, and that'll be 4 or 5 values of flesh tones plus the violet added into it for the shadow side. I'm going to start here laying a little bit of the light side in first, and we want this to be more flesh colored than black and white that we have now. So we're going to try to get some of that going. Our light side, we generally work dark to light. for this right now, though I'm trying to lay some paint. You can begin to see what's going on. We may have an extended show for what we're over with today, or we may do 2 parts, because trying to get this much done and do Hannah justice is important. So I want to make sure that I've done that to the best of my ability here. Again, portraiture is not my main painting. I typically are landscapes, seascapes, but if you learn to paint the human figure, you can paint about anything. The beauty of painting a human figure, there are no hard lines. There are no sharp edges. There are no barns to build or straight lines. So you have to get used to nuance. You have to be able to create rounded shapes and turning edges where shadows meet. Now I'm going over to the more medium mixture here now to intersperse in here where it's a little more pinkish and warmer flesh, not quite as highlighted. So I'll have to do that. And you'll begin to see it take some shape as a human being rather than just a little sketch. So we're pulling in some of the mid-tones now, the main body tone, in the places where it's going. Again, I've done my light map in basically a black and white, a dark and a white. Up under here, it's a little darker. I'll get over to the shadow side in a moment with a little violet into this same mixture. Just trying to get right now the mid-tone colors. Let's go ahead and put some in here in her neck. That gives us indication of what we're trying to do as well. The clavicle bone here, we'll probably lose that. Now let's take, let's step over to the shadow side too while we're here. Let's get some of that in. I always like to start with the shadows. I didn't on this just to show you more what flesh tone is going to look like. But this shadow side now has a tiny bit of violet into the same basic mixture. I'm going to pull some of that over that dark just lightly. I'll somewhat glaze that on there. But in here, all of this shadowed flesh. Again, the same basic flesh mixture. I've simply added a little bit of violet into it to give it some coolness, some shadowed effect. Body shadow, not cast shadow. The cast shadow is still there from the nose. I'm kind of leaving that in place. I may enhance that as well because that's an important feature. Right now, so I've got a cast shadow under her chin too. I'll put that back in. But right now I'm trying to get all the body shadows and transitions of these round transitions to make this representation of Hannah, a human being, even though it's somewhat going to be some facets in it. Okay, now back to our mid-tone area to get the rest of her face where it belongs. My detail will come working with her eyes, of course. Shoulder comes off the back of the neck there. Now the mid-tone on her nose area. I want to get that laid in. Whoa, that's a little too bright. Mid-tone, not height, highlight. The beauty of an acrylic paint is that it dries fast and you can paint right over it. If I were doing this in oil, I would have to wait a lot longer for each layer to dry. With this, it dries almost as soon as I put it down, so I can go right back in and make the corrections. Portraiture is a lot of corrections. Put it down, look at the shape. Again, whatever we're doing, whether it's a barn or a pretty young woman like Hannah, you're doing shapes. You're making shapes. You're correcting shapes. So we got that going. I'm going to pull a little bit of this flesh tone over that cast shadow, just to make it not so obtrusive. What we don't want to do, if we can help it, is leave big isolated shapes anywhere in the face. No geometric shapes. Now, if I can do this as a very modern approach, which I'm trying to do, modern approach, but I can also get carried away and just make it all squares and triangles and stuff like that. You can do that and it'll still look fine. It's just what style do you want it to be. I'm not going to go for a polished, overly blended version of this because that's not what we want for this one. This is a young person. We want it to look youthful. We want it to look modern. I don't want it to look dated and old. So I'll put some pink into this, or some more red into her lip areas and stuff like that. Let's see here. I'm not happy with the nose shape I have there. Let me fix that. While we were away, I did make a couple of corrections. I'm continuing to correct as I go. That is portraiture. Put the shape in, correct the shape, redraw it, redo it. Right now I'm trying to get that nostril in the right position without overdoing it. Very easy to overdo, so I've got to be careful on that. I'm going to cut it down a bit in size there. So now what I'll do is take a little of the shadowed flesh here and come in with the corner of the brush. Since it has actually a shadow, I'm going to use some of my shadow color from the background. There is a cast shadow right around that nose. It kind of comes in here. That part of the nose is in cast shadow. Her nose now, I'm going to go ahead. So my original background, which was black and violet, is actually going to be my shadow color as well. So her nose cast a shadow over here on the other side of this cupid purse, which is that little upturned part of the mouth. We're going to have to get that in there. A little more shadow color. Under her chin, the depression under the chin. Right now you can't differentiate between her lips and the shadow. So I will quickly fix that with a little more alizarin crimson into my flesh mixture to make her lips. So I'm going to basically add more red to this for her lips. The lower lip will be lighter than the upper lip because right there, there's the very top of her lip will be in shadow. So I'm going to have to be careful. I got that too light. So let's darken it. Shadow flesh. And yeah, this part is darker than the lower part. The upper lip is in 3 lobes. The lower lip is in 2. So we don't want to draw it corner to corner because it'll just look wonky. Now, right above the lip is a little area we call the new skin, which is kind of a highlight along the upper lip. I'm going to put that in there just to show where it is. Just little touches. That new skin, they call that. We'll also see that on a kind of like that on the edge of that cupid's purse. We'll see some of that highlightish color right here on her nose. Right here across the front of the nose, lightly. We don't want to get carried away emphasizing the nose. Same thing with the ears. No, they're not. They're there. We know they're there. Somewhere back in here. I'll show you where there's an ear. Back in there is something with the ear color. That's all I need to do there. Up around her eyes. Now, where we have light hitting on the top of the eye, remember that the eye is a ball shape. They're catching a little light here. So it's just I'm working with lights and darks here. Everything we do is dark and light. That is painting. Light and shadow, light and shadow, light and shadow. So what it's all about. So I got to try to hit anywhere there's light hitting the rounded surfaces. I've got to emphasize that. I have gone to a smaller brush now only because I'm working, try to get this laid in small. Let's see here. On the other side of her cupid's purse, there is a little bit of a highlight on this area right here. This little thing under her nose, I'm going to try to hit that with not quite, ooh, way too light. Not too good. Let's get that, it has a little bit of a highlight to show the shape, but not as light as the other sides. Let me get some more of the basic flesh, the value flesh color over that, because I've overdone it. You see, it's smeared out. Correct, correct, correct. Put it on, correct it, mess it up. There's some here's what I'll try to do now. I've got too much paint there. In that shadow under there, now I've lost my shadow shape there. Let's put it back. This comes all the way over. Okay, now let me get that line back in her mouth that I just erased by rubbing my finger on it. Got it a little carried away. Now I've got to put her lip back because I messed that up. Into the water, clean the brush. You'll notice I use the same brush throughout my painting pretty much. Some people change brushes with every brush stroke. I like to keep it the same one in my hand and simply wipe it and clean it if I can. It makes it a lot easier to paint. I want to lighten her lower lip a little more. There is a highlight right there, kind of, sort of, over that. More of a little more of this shadowed flesh I need. I may have to remix some here. And I think I'm going to stop in just a second here, give Hannah one more little break, and I need one too to get my bearings here and correction. Welcome back. While we gave Hannah a little bit of a break, I did a couple of corrections on her face. Again, there's a lot of measuring, trial and error in doing a portrait to get the features right and to do justice to Hannah. What I'm going to try to do now is lay in some of her hair color. You'll notice that she has blonde, and so under blonde always is some sort of a dark, and we have the umber that we laid in previously. So I'm going to work kind of light to dark. I've mixed up a little bit of raw sienna with a primary yellow and a bronzish colored yellow. So we're just going to kind of see what it looks like up here. Oh, way too light. Not too good. So let's take some more of the umber into it and dull that a bit more so that it's not so harsh a transition. So we're going to get in, we want to go light to dark on this as well. So we're going to put in some blondish colors here that are really more dark than the final one be. We'll highlight them with some of the lighter parts of the yellow. We'll put a little more white into this mixture, but right now we need to keep it a little bit dark just so that we know that Hannah is a blonde. That's what we're looking for. So just a little of that, and obviously we don't draw individual strands of hair. We simply suggest that it's hair by flicking around the end of the brush, something like that. We're coming into it, trying to get the shape of her hair more than anything, and just something to suggest a color. After this session is over, I may go back and make a lot of corrections to Hannah's portrait just to kind of do it justice. Now I put hair down there, probably won't leave it. In fact, I know I'm not. I'm going to cover it right now with some more of the dark, but just faintly say that there's hair back there. We'll know it's because of the color laying back there. We'll know that it's there. A couple more lighter tones, maybe some highlights in the hair, because like anything else, there's highlights, mid-tones. So I'm going to put some highlights in her hair right now. Again, some of this almost same mixture of yellow, but I just put a little more white in it, and just to suggest that there's some highlights in this blonde hair. Shouldn't be as light on the dark side, Pete. So let's go back the other way a little bit. Again, we're just making suggestions of stuff, not trying to draw individual bits of hair. I'm darkening the mixture one more time with umber on this side because I think I went a little carried away on the other side. There. Now a little more highlight on the right where the light is hitting more prominently, and we're going to call it for right now that. Okay? So at least that gives us more of an indication of Hannah's coloring. Now the most tedious part is going to be working around the eyes. First of all, there are shadows on the eye. Right under her eyelid is a shadow. So I'm going to try to lay that down now. I can't get it too dark. I have to be careful. So I'm going to wipe my brush pretty well and just lay that shadow in under the eyelid. Okay, and I'm going to do the same on the other side. There is a shadow across the eyeball brought on by the eyelid. Now, the darkest spot on this painting is going to be the very corners of her eyes. If we get those corners, so they need to be the darkest point in here for it to read correctly. So if I put that one in, and then over here, I'm not going to worry as much over here because I'll end up, we're going to lose this side into shadow hopefully anyway. I'm going to darken this corner a little more because again the shadow is running under there. I don't want her to look like a raccoon. I have to be careful. And Hannah has what is known as hazel eyes, which are a little bit greenish. So I'm going to take a little bluish and yellowish and try to make a hazelish, if there is such a thing. So we're going to just put a tiny bit of bluish color in her eye on this side to suggest that they're hazel colored eyes. And we'll do the same over here. Now I've got to get more flesh tones above her eyelid that are shadowy side. On the left side, I got to work that a little more because that's too dark. So we've got to bring some light over that eye. And up in here, more shadow flesh color, which again is our violet into our basic flesh color. So we're going to get some of that and work in this. This area of the eye has a shadow cast under here. So we have to get that shadowy flesh in there. And I may have to just go to a straight shadow tone because we're now in a cast shadow area. So again, up under her eyebrow and where the ridge of her eye is, there is some cast shadow in there. We're going to try to suggest that now. So we're going to push into this area a little bit here. I'm in the way of you seeing this, perhaps, hopefully not. But we're going to try to get the shadows now without going nuts with it and making the whole thing too dark. But we have to get those shadows in there. Yep, there's that one. That's cast a shadow over her eye. I'll push up into the flesh a little bit. Cast shadow there. We have our cast shadow under our nose already. I'm going to put it over here under her, that side of Cupid's purse. Down here a little more. Where else do I see a little bit more? This fold of the eyelid is a little bit of shadow in there, of course, because that is a round ball. We have to make it so, the eye socket. There is a little bit of shadow on her top lip. Also cast a bit of a shadow over the top of the bottom lip. So we have to get that, not maybe as prominent, but we want to suggest that is there. Now I have to be careful. I've reworked her mouth 3 times because I keep messing up the shape. So now that I put that dark there, I've got to go back to some some lighter flesh color with the pinkish to redo her lip a little lighter. So the bottom lip, the top part of the bottom lip catches light. So let's put that back in there. We have our shadow back in there where it was. The little bit of new skin, right across the top of the lip, we want to make sure that's there. That's an area that is it catches a light right at the Cupid's purse and the top of the lip. All right, now we're going to take a little lighter shadow count over here. With this line of her mouth, the jaw comes around. There's a little bit of a highlight right there. And right here on the bottom part of the lip is the same thing. So we're going to put a little of that lighter tone there. Sometimes you think it feels like we're working toward just a lot of patchwork, but what we're doing is making rounded shapes. If you'll notice her chin, it's rounded. This part right here, what I talked about, the new skin, and then the highlights along her nose, eyes, etc. So we've got most of that. Let me take a little of this mid-tone flesh and rebuild the part of the nose that isn't highlighted. so I can highlight it again. Build it up, take it down. That's a little too light. A little more of this mid-tone flesh here. Yeah, there we go. Mid-tone up the ridge, pulling over into the highlighted side. Again, everything is a turning edge. Nothing is hard-edged on a human face. So we're going to put a little of this now up under here. I'm going to have to bring my shadows back now on the left side of her face. In the shadow side, there certainly should be shadows there. So under her eye is a cast shadow from her eyeball. But I don't want to get it as dark as that, perhaps. I'll fuzz that out. I'm going to come under here. And since this is the shadow side, whenever we're painting something, an object, we want to lose one side or the other into the lighter shadow. We've elected to highlight her right side, so we're going to probably lose the left side into shadow. Before I'm finished with this painting, I will go back in and actually blur some of the edge of her face with the shadow background color so that it recedes into the shadow. It just helps to make a better presentation, and if you draw the whole thing with great detail all the way around, it makes what you call a cartoon. It flattens the piece. So in order to have rounded shape, we have to have light and shadow. So if the light's hitting it here, it can't be hitting it over here. By losing this side into the shadow, we make the roundness of her face. Just as it appears here, this side of her face is not as prominent as this side. This is highlights on her cheekbones, her jawbone here, right over her mouth, the side of her nose, etc. We have some of that over here. The other thing I have to put now, the next thing is a reflected light. Right here under her chin, I'm going to put a little bit of reflected light into that dark area. Now it can't be as light as the light side, but it is reflected light. The light is bouncing off of her neck and her collarbone area up under her chin, just a little bit. And I'll put a cast shadow over the rest of her neck here in just a moment as well. So let's lay in that, let's try to get that reflected light showing in here on her chin. Just enough. Bounce back from her neck area. So now, there's that. And it follows the shape of the chin there. I'm going to pull a little more of the mid-tone flesh back over it a little bit. If you have questions about all of this, obviously, give me a call. I'd be glad to explain it. Sometimes this is hard to pick up. There's a shadow there. What I'm doing right now is simply putting in shadows where they are visible. This is called finger painting, I guess. Just take your thumb and finger and rub out what you don't like or smooth it out. When you're working with a charcoal pencil, of course, you can just rub it or use a paper stomp to, as Hannah does in her work. You blend it as you go with that. When you're using paint, you can kind of do the same thing if you just smear it with your finger. Okay, there's that. This has a little more mid-tone in here to make it there. And you'll notice I'm talking to you on camera right now, but if I was here by myself, I'd be talking just as much because I talk to myself the whole time I paint. Usually it's to scold myself for doing something wrong. Under her hairline, there's probably a little shadow here and there, so we're just going to kind of suggest that here. We may pull a few strands of hair under her. I'm going to put some of this shadow color even into her hair. Why not? It's shadowed over here. Again, what we're trying to do here is not copy a photograph. We're trying to make a realistic presentation of a human being. Now what I'm going to do now, by catching where the light and shadows are hitting her. So I'm going to have to put our cast shadow now. I want you to notice the cast shadow from her jaw right down her neck. Cast shadows are hard edged, like the ones you see under her nose. The body or these shadows are soft, the flesh shadows, the rounded shapes. So we've got to make sure that we're doing them that way. I'm going to pull a strand of hair maybe over her ear. I don't know. I see one there. I could do that or not do that. I don't know that it adds anything, but let's see what happens if we put it in there. All this work, take the risk like this, why not? That's what we're here for, right, Hannah? We're here to learn. So now I'm going to pull some, just as this little wisp of hair here covers the ear. Again, we don't want to emphasize an ear for any reason, so let's just cover it a little bit with a little bit of hair. That way nobody's getting all bogged down and, gee, what does her ear look like? Nobody cares. A couple of highlights of the lighter tone of that, just to, and that helps us shape her face a little more like her youthful appearance. What happens when you put a lot of shadow in on a female's face, particular, a young person like Hannah, I have to be very careful, and I'm probably too much darkness in it will tend to age them a bit. So I have to be very careful, or she'll be extremely upset with me for making her look older. If you go the opposite way with an older woman and do it and make her look younger, they'll buy the painting. Make her look older than she is, ain't happening. All righty, so there's a little bit there. I think what I've got here, a little narrowness, so I'm going to round out her, by using her hair to help shape this area a little more. I'm going to round out here a little more, perhaps flip up here a little bit, and here. Remember, the top of her head was our measuring point for the center of her eyes, but her hair can flip up a little more and won't hurt a thing, because that's what hair does. It doesn't. So I'm going to put a little hair up into here like this, a little up this way, a little lighter yet, just to make it more fun. Something here against that darker background will round Hannah's face a little more. Wow. Let's see, what else do I need in here? We're getting closer. I think our eyebrow on the left side, I can bring out a little more without going nuts. I'm going to lighten this one, make it more browner than dark as it is. Whoops. Okay. Now, I'm going to step out. One other thing I'm going to do around the eye. Ooh, don't get so crazy with this, Pete. It's a young girl. When I put something down like that, if I don't like it right away, I'll do a technique called tonking it out. I'm going to lay a paper towel over it, rub it with my thumb, and it'll lift a lot of that paint right off. Put it right back there. I'm not crazy about what I just did, so I'm going to fuzz it out a bit with flesh color. Now I have to fix that. Everything you correct one thing, you got to fix something else. What I do want to do is one more dab on her nose here that I think would help it. Without going nuts with it. And right in this area of the lips again. The mouth is a rounded part. The teeth are oval, protrude out of your skull. This little highlight here on her cheek, or chin bone, would be nice. Put it back in where it belongs. What else here? We need a little more highlight color down here on the side of her jaw, because that light is hitting that. And this also, we get these, the lights and darks, and the flesh colors, the warmth, the coolness, are what give us life. Living flesh, blood running through our veins. The eyelashes, that's what, Hannah asked me about eyelashes earlier. How do we make eyelashes? Well, we make them very carefully and very suggestively, we don't overemphasize them. So I'm going to take some of the umberish color that we started with, which is kind of what it matches her eyebrows and eyelashes. What I'm going to do is take this little brush and just flick a couple up at the ends. I'm not going to try to do them all the way over, but I'm just going to push up. There's that one. So all it is a suggestion. They're not as visible on the bottom, so I'm going to just very little right there. Over here on the left eye, I'll push them up as well. That way it helps me get into the shadow. I think I need one more little flick over here in the corner. And I'm going to put a little of the darker mixture in that, some of the actual blackish area, because in all likelihood, Hannah puts on something they call mascara. So that would be fairly normal for a young woman to have a little darker eyelashes. There. I don't like the lower one I put down there, so let's kill it. And it's up in the lighter area, so let's knock it back a bit. And here, more of this white flesh. I'm going to take one more quick break because it looks like Hannah has sat there a long time listening to me run my mouth. So let's give her a quick break, me time to make any last adjustments, and we'll be back with you in just a minute. We've given Hannah a little bit of a break, me a chance to make a couple of corrections in the shapes we see. Right now, one of the things before we run out of time, everywhere there's an eye, Hannah and I were talking earlier, there's also a reflection. I'm going to put the highlight of that eye right where the light goes into it, and I have one shot at that. Instead of getting a tiny little one-haired brush, I'm going to take the corner of a chiseled brush and just going to put it in here where I see the light coming in there, and then in the same spot over here on this side. So if I get those in the right position, it highlights the eye, makes it look real. So now I've got that. That's the brightest spot I'm going to have in the whole painting. I don't have right now the cast shadow on Hannah's neck coming from the jawline down over the rest of her neck. So I'm going to try to put that in right now. This is going to be, I'm going to put that in kind of loose, but I don't want it to detract too much. So I'm going to shape that shadow as it follows her neck here. I'm going to leave the neck tones, the colors of the flesh under it, but I do want that to show there as a cast shadow. And let's shape it here a little bit more to give us a better presentation. Now, to make sure we haven't completely lost her neck shape there, let's put a little bit of that back in there. I'm going to mix up a little more of my flesh tones here. I'm going to pull a little brightness here. Now, also on her neck, so we're here, let's get her clavicle bone in there. So let's take some of this shadowed flesh, form the clavicle bone here with that one. We'll do it over here on the lighter side. I'm grabbing and going here with some of these mixtures, but her clavicle, that's way too white, would be showing up here. Clavicle bone. Females don't have a big Adam's apple like us guys, but we're going to suggest the shape of her neck that way. Pull this down as the clavicle bone in front of her shoulder here. We'll tone that purplish down a little bit more here, with a little bit of this medium flesh tone. And but it's going to hit, the shadow's going to hit it again. So let's do that now with a little bit. We got about 20 seconds, so I'm going to wrap this up. But our finishing touches I may put on afterwards. Just kind of shadow that back out, a little bit background color in it. I want to thank Hannah today for being so patient with me and trying to get this portrait. I hope that she's happy with the likeness. I hope you'll join us again on the next time for Art for Life. I'm again your host, Pete Brown. Thank you for joining me today, and we'll hope to see you again next time.